Carolina.
Clark fire away and hits a three. Clark launches and hits. Pure joy.
Is she injured? I guess is a fair question. Is she injured, or is it something other than an injury?
Her back is sore.
Something is fundamentally broken in how Caitlin Clark is being managed, and it's happening in real time during the most dominant stretch of her professional career. We're not talking about a coach making occasional questionable calls. We're talking about a pattern so consistent, so deliberately evasive, that it raises questions nobody in the Indiana Fever organization has been willing to answer on camera. Clark is literally rewriting the WNBA record books. She's playing at an efficiency level that defies professional basketball logic. She's dismantling elite defenses with a playmaking speed that leaves defenders operating in slow motion. And somehow, despite all of that, the very person responsible for putting her on the floor keeps making decisions that pull her away at the exact moments when she's doing the most damage. The benching decisions, the pulled minutes, the mysteriously vague injury explanations, the uncomfortable silences when reporters ask straightforward questions. It all points to something deeper. So today, we're breaking down exactly what Caitlin Clark has done over the last 3 games, why every statistical moment demands your attention, and why the coaching framework around her might be the biggest threat to what she's trying to accomplish. There's a specific moment that defines everything we need to talk about. Caitlin Clark is on the floor against Seattle. She's in complete control. The game is still competitive, still meaningful, and she is 4 rebounds away from a triple-double. 4, not 15, not 8. 4 rebounds in a game where Indiana is dominating and the outcome is not yet decided. The building knows what's about to happen. Everyone watching understands that Clark is about to join an exclusive club of players who can generate triple-doubles while orchestrating an entire offense and playing elite defense. It's the kind of moment that gets highlighted for years. It's the kind of performance that defines seasons. And Stephanie White benches her. Not pulls her for a breather. Not rotates her out for a possession or two. Removes her from the game with purpose, with intention, at the exact moment when the statistical milestone was within reach and the competitive advantage was undeniable. The Mystics immediately went on a run. The momentum shifted. What had been a controlled game suddenly became tighter than it needed to be. Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement. And the correlation between Clark being off the floor and Indiana's offensive efficiency dropping is not subtle. It shows up in the quarter-by-quarter scoring. It appears in the shooting percentages. It manifests in the spacing and ball movement. When Clark plays, Indiana dominates. When she doesn't, the team struggles. That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. That's a direct consequence of a coaching decision that nobody has adequately explained. But here's where it gets stranger. Before the Golden State game, a reporter walks up to Stephanie White with the most basic, most reasonable question imaginable. How is Caitlin Clark's back? That's it. A straightforward inquiry about her star player's health. A question any competent reporter would ask when a player has just missed a game. And Stephanie White's response isn't an answer. It's an evasion. It's the body language of someone who either doesn't know what's going on or actively doesn't want to say. She looks visibly uncomfortable. She talks in circles. She gives vague responses about soreness without timeline, without specifics, without any of the actual medical information that a head coach should be able to articulate about her most important player. The league eventually had to issue a warning to the Fever about injury report disclosure. Think about that. The Professional Basketball League had to step in and tell the coaching staff they weren't being transparent enough. That's the level of evasion we're discussing. And then, the Portland game. Clark sits out entirely with back stiffness. No timeline given, no specifics, just absence dressed up in medical language that explains nothing and raises everything. Between the Seattle performance and the Golden State performance sits a game that didn't happen, with explanations that don't satisfy, delivered by a coach who cannot look a reporter in the eye while answering a direct question about her best player's health. The frustrating part, the part that makes this conversation necessary, is that in the exact same games where White's decisions look most questionable, Caitlin Clark is performing at a level that is literally rewriting the WNBA record books. Not exaggerating. Literally. Record books falling one by one like the rest of the league isn't even in the same conversation. She's among the fastest players in WNBA history to reach combined milestones of 1,000 points, 250 rebounds, and 250 assists. Her assist records are being rewritten by her presence alone. Her three-point shooting recovery from 20% to 44% over 6 games is the trajectory of an MVP season. Her true shooting percentages across these games are reaching elite levels that no point guard in the league is currently matching. So the argument isn't that Stephanie White is a bad coach in general. The argument is specific. The argument is that when you line up all these coaching decisions side by side, when you look at the benching moments and the pulled minutes and the evasive medical communications, and you compare them to what Caitlin Clark is doing on the floor, something doesn't add up. And that mismatch between individual dominance and coaching framework limitations is the real story that needs to be examined. The Seattle Storm game is where everything starts making sense. Indiana came out in the first quarter and scored 32 points before Seattle's coaching staff could even draw up a meaningful adjustment. 32. In one quarter. The outcome was effectively decided before the game actually started because Caitlin Clark was operating at a level that made every single possession go in the direction Indiana wanted it to go. This wasn't a close game masquerading as competition. This was a statement. This was a demonstration of what happens when the league's most dominant player is given the freedom to operate without limitation. What defined Clark's entire Seattle performance was something that almost never happens in professional basketball at the primary offensive player level: efficiency at a scale that defies normal statistical expectations. She took 10 field goal attempts. 10. Not 15, not 12, not 11. 10 shot attempts in an entire game, and she finished with 21 points. That ratio only exists when a player is doing two very specific things simultaneously. First, converting at an extraordinary rate from the field. Second, drawing enough fouls to supplement scoring without needing additional attempts. Clark did both with surgical precision. She went to the free throw line 9 times and missed 0 of them. Not one. Perfect execution. 9 for 9. The mental focus required to maintain that level of accuracy while simultaneously distributing 10 assists and tracking 7 rebounds is the kind of multi-threaded concentration that separates elite players from everyone else in this league. She's running the offense, she's reading defenses, she's tracking position for boards, and she's maintaining perfect free throw discipline. That's not just skill. That's presence of mind at an almost superhuman level. But the number that deserves the most attention from that night is the 10 assists. Everyone focuses on scoring. Everyone looks at point totals. The assists tell the actual story of what Clark was doing on the floor. She wasn't just finding open players. She was finding them before they were open. She was releasing passes to spots that teammates hadn't fully reached yet. Her reads were operating at a processing speed that made Seattle's defensive rotations look like they were moving in slow motion. One full decision cycle ahead of the defense. Almost every meaningful possession. That's not typical point guard play. That's transcendent. The pace she was setting was creating advantages that Seattle's defense couldn't adjust to fast enough. By the time defenders reacted to one action, Clark was already executing the next one. The ball was moving through space faster than rotations could tighten. Open lanes were appearing because she was anticipating them before Seattle's help defense could even recognize the threat. This is what basketball looks like when one player is operating at a genuinely different level than everyone else on the floor. And then, the triple-double watch started. She needed 4 more rebounds in the second half. 4. The game was locked in completely. The building was buzzing with the anticipation of watching her achieve something statistically significant. The competitive game was still meaningful. Indiana was dominating, but the outcome wasn't yet decided, and Stephanie White pulled her from the game. The correlation between Clark being on the floor and Indiana's dominance is not subtle. It shows up immediately in the quarter-by-quarter scoring. In the quarters where Clark's minutes were most limited, Indiana still won, but the margins tightened. The efficiency dropped. The ball movement slowed. The defense lost its intensity. Clark's presence on the floor didn't just make Indiana better. Clark's presence made Indiana unstoppable. And when she came off, the team reverted to a significantly lower level of play. That's not an opinion. That's a measurable statistical fact. The difference between Indiana with Clark and Indiana without Clark is the difference between a team that dominates elite opponents and a team that struggles against mid-tier competition. And yet the decision to pull her stood. The triple-double didn't happen. The record remained unbroken. The moment passed, and nobody has explained why Stephanie White made that choice at that exact moment. Between the Seattle performance and the Golden State explosion sits a game that didn't happen, the Portland Fire game. Caitlin Clark sat out entirely. The official explanation was back stiffness. No timeline, no specifics, no clarity. Just absence, dressed up in medical language that raises more questions than it answers, delivered by a coach who looked visibly uncomfortable when asked to explain herself. This is where the pattern gets harder to ignore. It's not one questionable decision anymore. It's two. And the timing creates a specific narrative. Clark just put together one of the most efficient performances of her professional career. The building is energized. The record books are falling. The momentum is building. And then she doesn't play in the next game due to an injury explanation that a head coach cannot articulate to a reporter with confidence. When you watch the interview, when you see Stephanie White's body language, it's not the posture of someone who has clear medical information. It's the posture of someone navigating something they don't want to explain clearly. The league eventually issued a warning to the Fever about injury report disclosure. Let that sink in. The Professional Basketball League had to step in and tell the coaching staff they weren't being transparent enough about Caitlin Clark's health status. That doesn't happen because of minor communication oversights. That happens because someone official noticed a pattern of vagueness that violated the transparency requirements the league has in place. The franchise got warned. The message was clear. Start being clearer about what's going on with your best player. But even after that warning, even after the league had stepped in, the explanations didn't become more specific. They became more careful. White started deferring to medical staff, started saying things like, "I don't disclose anything that's not already disclosed by our medical team." Which is interesting phrasing, because it implies that the medical team is disclosing information, and White is just choosing not to elaborate on it. Or it implies that the medical team isn't disclosing information, and White is using that as cover for her own lack of transparency. The Portland absence sits between two dominant performances like a question mark that nobody has answered. This wasn't a week-long injury recovery. This was a single game where Clark sat out, and then she came back and played 40 minutes against Golden State without any limitation. No restrictions. No gradual return. Full, unrestricted, dominant minutes in a game where she orchestrated one of the most impressive third quarters in recent WNBA history. If her back was sore enough to sit out completely against Portland, why was there no gradual return against Golden State? Why no minutes restriction? Why full, unrestricted play from the opening tip? The answer is either that the injury was more serious than represented, in which case White lied about the timeline, or the injury was less serious than represented, in which case White benched her for reasons that have nothing to do with health. There is no third option that makes sense. There's no explanation for how a player goes from back stiffness that requires sitting out an entire game to playing 40 minutes of unrestricted, dominant basketball the very next game without some form of inconsistency in either the original diagnosis or the medical decision-making. And that's the frustrating part. In the same timeframe, when this vague injury explanation was happening, Caitlin Clark was putting together performances that rank among the best 3-game stretches in modern WNBA history. The Portland game wasn't the break in the narrative that made sense. It was the interruption that raised every question about whether the coaching framework around Clark is optimized for her success or optimized for something else entirely. That's the question the Fever front office eventually has to answer publicly. Because right now, from the outside, it looks like they're managing something other than just basketball. Caitlin Clark walks onto the floor against Golden State, and nobody in the building knows that they're about to watch one of the most dominant individual performances of the 2026 WNBA season. The first quarter is tight. Indiana 19, Golden State 18. Clark is feeling it out, not forcing anything, just playing, getting her legs back after the absence, finding the rhythm that had been interrupted by the Portland sit-out. Nothing alarming. Nothing that suggests what's about to unfold. just a professional basketball game with standard competitive tension and no indication of the absolute takeover that's coming. Then the second quarter happens. Golden State explodes. The Valkyries' bench, Tiffany Hayes leading the offensive charge, generates the kind of consistent scoring that Indiana's defense has no clean answer for. Golden State builds an 8-point lead, their biggest of the game. The crowd at Gainbridge goes quiet. A player who supposedly just came back from back stiffness is watching her team get outscored by 8 in a single quarter. The narrative of the evening is heading somewhere uncomfortable. The questions are forming. The concern is real. Clark is shooting 64% from the field at this point, but the team is still losing the quarter. The momentum is going the wrong direction. Halftime comes and Golden State is leading. The game is slipping away, and then the third quarter starts. Caitlin Clark decides the game is over. 29-17, Indiana, third quarter. That's a 12-point swing in one quarter, powered almost entirely by one player who supposedly just came back from an injury that was serious enough to sit out a game completely. She comes off the bench for the second half, and the body language is completely different from the first half. She's not easing into possessions. She's attacking the first one before Golden State's defense can even set their coverage. She pushes pace in transition immediately, getting the ball up the floor in under 3 seconds, and converts a fast break that sends the first real current of electricity through the building. That's the first of 6 fast break points on 2 attempts for the entire night. 100% conversion. Both attempts in the third quarter. Both at the exact moments when Indiana needed to shift the emotional momentum of the game from slipping away to completely controlled. Then, the first 3. Clark catches the ball above the break, pump fakes once to get the defender off balance, and releases with a hand barely at her eye level. It goes in. The crowd reacts with a specific sound that only Clark threes at big moments generate, a delayed explosion. Like the building needed a half second to process that the ball actually went in. Golden State calls timeout, resets the scheme, tries to take away what she just did. She drives past the new coverage on the very next possession and draws the foul. 2 free throws makes both. The sequence is 3, foul, 2 free throws. 5 points in roughly 45 seconds of clock time completely changes the emotional temperature of the game. The Valkyries are no longer leading. Indiana is taking control, and nobody is stopping what's about to happen. Then the technical foul. Then the flagrant foul. 2 official actions in the same quarter against Clark. 2 moments where a lesser player, a player whose confidence is tied to external circumstances rather than internal competitive drive, would mentally exit the game, would lose focus, would let the frustration interrupt the flow. Clark processes both, plans the next play, and executes it like the incidents never occurred. That's the goldfish mentality in its most visible form. The fire that generated the tech is the same fire that was generating 5 points per 45 seconds of basketball. You want one, you get the other. You cannot separate them. Aaliyah Boston becomes the direct beneficiary of everything Clark is doing. Every time Golden State's defense collapses on Clark driving or attacking from 3, Boston receives feeds in the post against single coverage. She goes 8 of 15 from the field for 20 points and 16 rebounds. A back-to-back double-double that would be the story of almost any other game. Against the backdrop of Clark's third quarter, it becomes supporting evidence of how unguardable Indiana is when Clark operates at full capacity. Fourth quarter, Indiana closes it out cleanly. The damage is already done. Kelsey Mitchell goes 11 for 11 from the free throw line. Perfect. Indiana doesn't need to go back to Clark for volume scoring. She's already decided the outcome. The fourth quarter is about finishing, and they finish it with the kind of clean execution that only happens when one team has already broken the other's will to compete. The records that Caitlin Clark is breaking in real time need to be documented because they're genuinely historic, and they're happening quietly inside game-to-game coverage that focuses on wins and losses rather than what the numbers actually mean across a career arc. We're not talking about one record. We're not talking about 2. We're talking about a systematic rewriting of how WNBA benchmarks are being established right now in 2026. Clark is among the fastest players in WNBA history to reach the combined milestones of 1,000 points, 250 rebounds, and 250 assists. That's not a single record. That's 3 significant career achievements reached simultaneously in a way that almost never happens in professional basketball. The assist records specifically are being rewritten by her presence in this league. Her per-game assist averages through this season are operating at a level that no guard in WNBA history has sustained at her age. In her third season, while also averaging the points and rebounds that complete the statistical picture. She's not a playmaker who sacrifices scoring. She's not a scorer who sacrifices ball movement. She's both simultaneously at elite levels. The three-point shooting recovery is its own record conversation. Early in the season, she was hovering near 20% from three. Defenses were openly daring her to shoot. They were taking the chance that her long-range shot wasn't reliable enough to punish them. And then something shifted. She hit 41% against Washington in a losing effort. She hit 44% against Golden State in a dominant win. She hit elite rates against Seattle as well. The trajectory of her shooting correction from 20% to 44% over 6 games is the kind of performance arc that defines MVP seasons when it happens at the right time on the right team. That's a complete recalibration of how defenses have to approach her. Her true shooting percentages across the Seattle and Golden State games were 75.2% and 64% respectively. Those numbers represent back-to-back elite efficiency games that no point guard in the entire league is currently matching. TS percent in the 75% range is elite company. That's what elite closers achieve in isolation games where they're taking over. Clark is doing it while orchestrating an entire offense and managing 10 assists per game. The combination of skills she's demonstrating shouldn't be able to exist in one player. The combination of elite playmaking, recovered three-point shooting, downhill driving threat, and free throw accuracy gives Clark an offensive toolkit that has no clean defensive solution. The scouting report against her right now is genuinely unsolvable. You cannot sag off her defensively. She's hitting from 40 feet. You cannot play her physical. She draws fouls at 8 per game and converts them at near-perfect rates. You cannot switch on her. She reads switches faster than defenders can execute them. You cannot go under screens. She's shooting 44% from 3. You cannot go over screens aggressively. She'll drive past the coverage and create for teammates. The math doesn't work. There's no defensive approach that takes away enough of her toolkit to justify what you're giving up on the other end. This is what generational talent looks like. This is what happens when a player has already figured out how to be elite in multiple dimensions simultaneously at a professional level. The statistical reality is that Caitlin Clark is playing at a level right now that demands she touches the ball every single possession. Against the backdrop of all of this, the benching decisions make even less sense. The pulled minutes become even more costly. The vague injury explanations become even more frustrating. Because what we're watching is a statistical accumulation that suggests this could be one of the best individual seasons any guard has put together in this league's history. And that season is being interrupted by coaching decisions that nobody can adequately explain. The records keep falling. The performances keep escalating. The question keeps growing louder. And at some point, someone has to answer what's actually happening. Let's line everything up chronologically, because the pattern becomes impossible to ignore when you put all these decisions side by side. First, Clark gets benched immediately after hitting back-to-back threes against Washington. Just pulled out of the game right after she executes the exact shot that should have momentum building behind it. The Mystics immediately go on a run. The game tightens. What had been controlled becomes competitive. The messaging is clear. Even when Clark is playing at her highest level, even when she's executing perfectly, the coaching staff is making decisions to limit her minutes in ways that don't match the competitive situation. Then Seattle happens. Clark is operating at a 75% true shooting percentage. She's on pace for a triple-double, 4 rebounds away. The game is still competitive. The outcome is still meaningful. And Stephanie White pulls her. She pulls her with purpose, with intention, at the exact moment when the statistical milestone was within reach. Seattle wins the quarters where Clark's minutes are most limited. The team's offensive efficiency drops measurably. The correlation between her being on the floor and Indiana's dominance is not subtle, and yet the decision stood. The explanation that emerged was that it was an abundance of caution. Abundance of caution during a game where you're dominating and your best player is on the edge of historic statistical achievement. That's not typical coaching logic. Then a reporter asks Stephanie White a straightforward question. How is Caitlin Clark's back? And White's response isn't an answer. It's an evasion. It's the body language of someone navigating something they don't want to explain clearly. She looks visibly uncomfortable. She talks in circles. She gives vague responses about soreness without timeline, without specifics. The league notices. The league issues a warning about injury report disclosure. The message is clear: be more transparent. But the clarity doesn't come. Instead, White starts deferring responses to medical staff. She starts saying she doesn't disclose anything that isn't already disclosed by the medical team, which is careful phrasing that avoids answering the actual question while technically not lying. But it raises the question of why she can't answer a direct question about her best player's health with confidence and clarity. A head coach should be able to articulate what she knows about her most important player's medical status. The fact that she can't suggests either she doesn't know or she's actively avoiding saying what she does know. Then Portland. Clark sits out entirely with back stiffness. No timeline, no specifics, just absence dressed up in medical language. And then she comes back against Golden State and plays 40 minutes without any limitation. Full, unrestricted, dominant basketball. If she was sore enough to sit out Portland completely, why no gradual return against Golden State? Why no minutes restriction? Why full minutes from the opening tip? The only way those decisions make sense together is if the injury explanation was either exaggerated or not the real reason she was benched. Clark comes back and plays one of the best individual games of her professional career. 22 points, 9 assists, 100% fast break conversion, a third quarter that ends the game by itself, dominant start-to-finish basketball. She picks up a technical and a flagrant in the same quarter and doesn't miss a beat. She's operating at the absolute peak of her abilities. And what does this prove? That the medical situation was handled inconsistently. That the communications from the coaching staff don't line up with the actual competitive reality. That there's a mismatch between what White is saying and what Clark is demonstrating on the floor. The pattern isn't random. The benching decisions aren't random. The pulled minutes aren't random. The evasive medical communications aren't random. They're all part of the same framework that raises a specific question. Is the coaching environment around Caitlin Clark actually optimized for Caitlin Clark, or is it optimized for something else? Because what we're watching is a player operating at the absolute peak of her abilities inside a coaching framework that keeps pulling her at the wrong moments. And nobody has explained why. The defensive problem that Caitlin Clark presents right now is mathematically unsolvable. There is no scouting report combination that takes away enough of her offensive toolkit without exposing something else that becomes even more costly. This is what generational talent looks like when it's fully developed and operating without limitation. And the coaching framework around her keeps creating limitations at the exact moments when those limitations hurt the most. You cannot sag off her defensively. She's hitting from 40 feet out. She's recovered from early season struggles and now shooting 44% from 3 in dominant games. That's elite company. That's respect the three-point shot territory. The moment a defense takes a step back, the moment a defender sags off to help with driving lanes, she's already released from distance. You have to play her tight. You have to respect the shot. You cannot play her physical. She draws fouls at 8 per game and converts them at near perfect rates. We've seen her go 9 for 9 from the free throw line. We've seen her go 11 for 11 in supporting roles. Her free throw discipline is elite. So the moment you try to use physical defense to disrupt her, you're sending her to the line, and she's converting. You're actually helping her offense by trying to limit it with physicality. Every foul is a possession where her scoring becomes automatic. You cannot switch on her defensively because she reads switches faster than defenders can execute them. Against Seattle, her reads were a full decision cycle ahead of the defense on nearly every meaningful possession. She sees the switch forming, and she's already planning the next action. She's already recognizing the mismatch that the switch creates. She's already identifying where the space is going to open up. By the time a defensive switch is complete, she's already made the read that punishes it. You cannot go under screens aggressively because she's shooting 44% from 3. If you go under a screen trying to stay attached to a driver, you're giving up space for a shot release. And she's making 44% of those shots. That's elite efficiency from distance. You can't afford to give her space. You cannot go over screens because she'll drive past the coverage and create for teammates. When defenses lock into her at the three-point line, she has the dribble ability to attack the paint and finish. And if the defense rotates to stop the drive, she has the playmaking to find the open man. She went 10 assists against Seattle because she was attacking the right spaces and her teammates were converting the looks she created. The math doesn't work. There's no defensive approach that takes away enough of her toolkit to justify what you're giving up on the other end. This is what happens when a player has figured out how to be elite in multiple dimensions simultaneously. She's an elite playmaker. She's an elite three-point shooter when she's dialed in. She's a downhill scoring threat. She's a free throw finisher. She's a transition player who converts at 100% when she's attacking. She's operating in a dimension that most players in this league don't even have access to. The defensive impossibility of containing Clark means she has to touch the ball every possession. Her presence on the floor has to be maximized. Her minutes have to be protected. The team's entire offensive framework has to be built around her ability to create advantages. And yet the coaching decisions we're seeing suggest the opposite. The benching, the pulled minutes, the evasive health communications, they all point to a framework that's limiting her, not maximizing her. The Golden State game is the clearest evidence. Clark comes back from the Portland absence and plays 40 minutes of unrestricted basketball. She orchestrates a third quarter that changes the entire emotional temperature of the game. Indiana scores 29 points. Golden State scores 17. That's a 12-point swing powered by one player's individual dominance. The Valkyries can't adjust because there's no adjustment that works. They can't double her because teammates become wide open. They can't play tight because she's hitting from distance. They can't go physical because she's converting fouls. They're operating at a level of helplessness that only happens when one team has a clear talent advantage. And that's what the Fever have. They have a clear talent advantage because they have Caitlin Clark, but they're not maximizing it. They're limiting it. And at some point, that pattern becomes less about basketball decisions and more about something else entirely. The New York Liberty are coming. That's the first genuinely elite opponent on Indiana's schedule, and the real measure of where this team actually stands becomes unavoidable. Against Liberty-level defensive pressure, with Liberty-level personnel, every coaching decision around Clark will be magnified. Every pulled minute will cost more. Every wasted possession will feel more significant. The margin for error disappears. The coaching choices stop being interesting debate points and start becoming the difference between winning and losing games that matter. The Liberty have the defensive infrastructure to potentially slow Clark down. They have multiple wings who can make her work on the defensive end. They have personnel that can pressure ball movement. They have the kind of complete team that doesn't have obvious mismatches for Indiana to exploit. When Indiana plays the Liberty, when Clark has to operate against that level of defensive discipline, the coaching framework around her becomes everything. Every decision matters. Every minute limitation becomes costly. Every benching at the wrong moment becomes a loss. If Stephanie White is still making the same decisions against the Liberty that she's been making against weaker opponents, the conversation becomes impossible to ignore. If Clark is still getting pulled at the wrong moments, if she's still being benched during competitive games, if the health communications are still vague, then it's no longer a question of basketball philosophy. It becomes a question of whether the coaching framework is actually aligned with winning against elite competition. The statistical reality is that Clark is ready. She has shown that across 3 consecutive performances that rank among the best stretches of basketball any player has put together in the 2026 WNBA season. She's proven she can operate at elite efficiency. She's proven she can carry a team through games with the kind of individual impact that only happens a handful of times in a generation. She's broken records. She's rewritten benchmarks. She's done everything a player can do to prove she's ready for the biggest moments against the best opponents. The question is whether everything around her will finally get out of the way and let her prove it against the Liberty. Because what we've seen over the last 3 games is elite performance constantly interrupted by coaching decisions that don't match the competitive situation. Against the Liberty, those interruptions become unaffordable. Against a team with that level of defensive discipline, with that level of personnel, Indiana can't afford to bench her Clark during competitive moments. Indiana can't afford to pull her at the wrong times. Indiana can't afford vague injury explanations that create uncertainty about her availability. 5-2. That's Indiana's record. The records keep falling. Clark keeps escalating her performances. She's just getting started. The statistical accumulation she's building could be one of the best individual seasons in this league's history. But that season is being written inside a coaching framework that keeps pulling her at the wrong moments. And the Liberty game is where that framework gets tested against an opponent that can punish those decisions. The league should be worried about what Clark is doing. Indiana should be worried about what their own decisions are costing them. Because there's a difference between a team with Caitlin Clark operating at full capacity and a team with Caitlin Clark operating inside limitations that the coaching staff keeps creating. The Liberty are coming. And when they arrive, that difference is going to become very clear. Clark is ready. The question is whether Indiana's coaching framework will finally get out of the way and let her prove it. What we've watched over the last 3 games is a player operating at the absolute peak of her abilities. Historic efficiency, record-breaking playmaking, statistical accumulation that demands attention. Caitlin Clark is demonstrating why she's the most dominant player in women's basketball right now. She's rewriting the WNBA record books. She's leaving defenders helpless. She's carrying her team through games with individual performances that happen once in a generation. But those performances are happening inside a coaching framework that keeps interrupting them. The benching decisions. The pulled minutes at the wrong moments. The evasive health communications. The pattern points to something deeper than basketball strategy. It points to a question that the Indiana Fever organization eventually has to answer publicly. Is the framework around Caitlin Clark optimized for her success or optimized for something else entirely? The Liberty are coming. That's where we find out whether anything actually changes.